Welcome to Everlutionary, a podcast about how we can heal and transform with the world. Every episode of my show, we explore conversations around philosophy, science, mysticism, social justice, how we can be change catalysts and activators and mobilize each other to create a world free of violence. I'm your host, Hawah Kasat. Peace, peace, peace. What's up? What's good? How you all doing, my friends in podcast world? Thanks for tuning back in. I'm your host, Hawah Kasat. That's right. I'm back. And it's my solo episode. I do this every third episode. So those that tuned in to my last couple of episodes, you had a chance to really dive deep into erotic ecology. And then we went deep into holistic health and healing. I would definitely recommend you check those two episodes out. I am right now moving into a series of episodes that are going to be focusing on racism, colonization, and the healing of the human spirit. And there are a lot of things that are alive for me in this moment. At this moment in particular, as I record this, which is just a couple of days before it comes out, I am in Massachusetts on a healing retreat for men of color. And myself and a dear friend of mine, Reggie Hubbard, is here with me. We are co-leading and guiding this retreat for men of color, about 20 men that have come here from all around the country, the United States of America. And we've been going deep, and I'm going to kind of use a lot of what we've been doing this week to guide my reflections as I think through my thoughts of where we are in this moment in history. So if you have a chance to go back, you can listen to that episode with Reggie Hubbard. It's back there. I think it's like episode 10 or 11. So go back and check it out. It's on grief and gratitude. It's a beautiful episode that I'm sure will provide a lot of inspiration to anyone. It inspired me, that's for sure. So getting a week in person with Reggie and all these brothers has been nothing short of phenomenal. And we've been talking a lot here in our circles, and one thing that's been coming up is the news and how we're all impacted so deeply by the news and the media. I've got many friends and colleagues in my life who choose not to turn on the news these days, and I respect that. You know, I've been trying to give myself that same liberty when I can, and I try to distance myself, and I'm really particular about what stories I tune into and read and listen to. But I'm still very much on a daily basis at some point reading major headlines or an article here or there or some news summary of the top headlines. It's really hard for me to stay away from what's going around in the world, like the recent developments, the current events. It's been hard for me to fully turn off or to do like a news fast or media fast. And I've noticed that it's become a part of my daily pattern. It's part of my cadence. It does make me feel plugged into what's happening in the world. And there are times when I wonder why I do it to myself, because the world is really, really intense. So I got some friction there. I got some tension. I know folks that are trying to shield and protect themselves from the news are doing it to make sure that your nervous systems don't get overly activated. I 100% get that. And at the same time, I'm noticing if I don't turn on the news, I almost feel like I am not owning up to my own responsibility. And this is my baggage. This is nobody else's baggage, but this is just what comes up for me. And when I do tune into the media, I end up feeling a lot of deep grief and sorrow. And sometimes I feel really down and overwhelmed because I do tune in to the news. I struggle sometimes with just the balance between what's healthy friction, what is healthy absorption, what is healthy consumption, and what is not. How much is good? How much is bad? How much is too little? I'm one of the people that believes in towing the lines. I feel like walking on the tightrope might be the mantra of my life. I like the balancing act. I like the moderation. I like trying a little bit of everything. I love experimenting. I'm super curious. And that curiosity sometimes can make it really, really hard for me to stay away from the news. And also, I think there's a sense of obligation or a feeling of responsibility. There's a feeling that, like, man, if I don't watch what's happening, then I'm almost ignoring it. And that's not fair. It's a disservice to the people that need me to activate myself. And somehow I need to figure out how to activate myself. And so that's the process for me. And it's tough because then I'll go through days and sometimes I'll just feel really bummed out or overwhelmed and I don't know exactly what to do because I feel powerless. For real. I feel powerless. And it's tough. It's tough to be in a position where you see so much pain and suffering in the world and to feel like there's nothing or there's so little that you can do about it. It's tough to feel that way. Yeah, it's tough to feel that way. So most of us that are tuning in, whether you're watching the news or not, you're probably still talking to your friends. You're getting updates in different ways. You're still kind of probably hearing what's happening in the world. If you're listening to my podcast right now, even though I'm not here as a news reporter, my reflections are still often based and rooted in current events and ways that those are impacting me in my life and my reflections on the world, which is really fucked up right now. It's some bad shit happening in the world right now. That alone is probably what's keeping you from tuning into the news. And I don't want my podcast to be a place where I'm talking about current events so much because I want my work to be timeless. I want this work to be mystical and poetic, rooted in interconnection and healing and pathways to growth. I'm interested in the models for social change. I'm interested in community. I'm interested in learning. And I'm also allowed to feel two things at the same time. I'm feeling a lot of compassion and acknowledgement for people that need to stay away from the news. You're protecting yourself, your sanity, you're protecting your heart. And also there's a feeling in me, it's a feeling of, wow, we also need to be tuned in to what's happening right now. We can't ignore what is happening right now in the world. But then even if we want to tune in, what are we tuning into, right? That becomes the other question. And I get that. I hear that. I hear that from a lot of my friends. And I also can understand that. There's this sense of, I don't want to tune in to this reality because this reality is really not the reality I want to live in. And instead, I'm going to focus on the things that bring me joy and the things that bring me happiness, the things that make me feel alive. And I get that. That makes a lot of sense. It's how we have to protect ourselves. And we all have to protect ourselves in some way. We have to be able to feel safe in our bodies. And if our nervous systems are hyperactivated, it's hard to even sleep at night, or at least sleep long enough and not wake up with night terrors or wake up early in the morning before you really want to because you're so stressed out or you end up with some stress dreams, or to enjoy our food even, right? I get that. It happens to me more than I would like it to. And at the same time, there are people who don't have that privilege to make the choice and decide whether they want to watch the news or not because they are on the news. They're the people that are literally in the crosshairs and they don't have that privilege. I'm here with all these men in Massachusetts on this retreat and we are laughing, we are playing games, we are singing together and making music together. It's a big part of the healing work we're doing. We need to remember that we can uplift joy in our community. And I also want to be a part of, and I know a lot of the brothers I'm working with this week, we all want to be a part of organizing and strategizing and building real movement so that all the people in the world who can't experience that joy and that laughter right now, that we can hold them too within our arms, right? And it's important to be able to hold both of those things at the same time. And so wherever you are on this spectrum, because it is a spectrum, wherever you are on the spectrum, it's important that there's enough capacity or expansiveness to be able to do a little bit of both, right? We got to be able to do a little bit of both. We have to be able to engage in that deep pleasure, that deep joy, because that's how we fill our batteries so we can go back into the community and do the work that needs to be done. And we also need to be able to feel and experience that deep grief and not push it away. We have to embrace it. We have to know that this is a part of the lived experience right now. And in fact, this grief that we're experiencing, this sorrow and pain we're experiencing, this is the fuel. This is the actual energy that is the inertia that we need to create transformation in the world. And if we push that grief away, if we don't actually acknowledge and know what's happening in the world, then we won't feel the sorrow. And without that sorrow, we won't be called to activate ourselves to change the world. You feel me? So this is where I am at this moment. This is how I'm sitting with myself with these questions. I'm sitting with these questions, how much to absorb, how much not to. I'm sitting a lot right now. I'm reflecting a lot on Washington, D.C. You know, this was my home for 25 years. Washington, D.C., it raised me. It was more than anywhere else in the world. That's where I am from. I spent more time in Washington, D.C. than anywhere else in the world in my life. I can still hear the metro rumbling beneath my feet. I can feel the heartbeat of Malcolm X Park, the rhythm of the drums and the djembes and the dancing on a Sunday. This was basically my church for 25 years. It was outside under an open sky, surrounded by trees. I remember we'd be out doing acro yoga in the park with all the homies. I remember throwing frisbee in the park. I remember hopping on my bike and jumping into Rock Creek Park and riding down Beach Drive and hitting all the trails. I loved going to Scramble on the Rocks and meditating on the rocks. I mean, Washington, D.C. and the restaurants and the music, going out dancing all night, the food. I mean, D.C. is an incredible city. It's incredible. It taught me what it meant to be fighting for something larger than myself. It's where I started a nonprofit organization with friends, an organization that grew to be impacting over 24 schools. We're working at the intersection of healing and violence prevention, arts, and mental health. DC is a place where you will come across some of the most incredible people that care so deeply about the world. And many of the people in DC are not the ones that you'll find are turning away from the news, but are actually really turning towards the news, because that's kind of some of what is the personality of DC. And man, DC, my chest is tightening as I think about my city under siege. DC is under siege. Federal agents are filling the streets. Homeland Security have taken over the DC police. And occupation has been disguised as protection, y'all. And Washington, D.C. feels less like home than ever before to me. And it's true. So just to clarify the timeline for those that don't know me really that well, I left Washington, D.C. in 2020, the year that COVID rocked our world, right? I officially moved out of D.C. that August of 2020. I was living at that time in a big apartment building in Adams Morgan, right at the border of Mount Pleasant. It is a home for so many immigrant communities, people from Honduras and El Salvador and Mexico and Colombia. Just such a beautiful mixture of diversity, such a rich culture. Initially, I left DC because of COVID and the lockdowns. I packed up my entire apartment into brown boxes and I moved out of the city, thinking that I would go back to the city once COVID was over. I never knew when I was leaving DC that I was really leaving for the long haul. I never thought that was happening. I thought I was just going to take a break and then go back after COVID blew over. That was my plan. I wanted to ride out COVID in nature, away from the concrete, away from the big apartment buildings. This was a time in the world where we just didn't really even understand what COVID was. So it made sense for me to be away from such a densely populated area. And I had the privilege to get out. I did, and I took advantage of that. I continued working remotely for my nonprofit organization as the director for still another year into COVID. But even then, I knew that I was going to step down and step away from the nonprofit sector. I knew that that was not the place I wanted to continue the next phase of my life. So when I left DC, and me and a few friends, we launched a brand new project called Roots to Sky Sanctuary. And we were able to really become stewards of this 125 acres of land right at the border of West Virginia, about 3 hours from Washington, D.C. And I kind of based myself out of there by December. And I started living on the land where we're building this regenerative farm and healing arts center. And I started basing myself there and spending a lot of time there for the next 2 years. And when I wasn't there, I was living somewhere else overseas. And for some reason in that space, I just never got the itch to move back to DC. I just never wanted to return to that fast-paced life. The police sirens, the ambulances, the traffic. It was just so noisy all the time. Anytime I went back to visit, it was so noisy. And I just felt that my nervous system got placed back onto high alert. And now I'm torn. I'm torn, y'all. I'm really, really torn. I'm torn between memory and reality. I know the power of mobilization. I know the power of coming together on the streets and protesting. I know the power of standing in solidarity and bringing attention to the systems of oppression. And because I'm not in DC in some ways, I feel like I can't even do enough. There's nothing I can really do. I ache for a counter movement. I ache for something thunderous. I ache for a roar of collective resistance. And at the same time, I carry this exhaustion of years of fighting, of years of teaching, of years of organizing on the front lines. You know, I'm tired. Part of me is really tired. And we've been talking about this a lot together as men out here on this retreat, just how tired, it can feel, how exhausting it is to be a brown or a black man living in this world today. And I'm still grieving a lot of things, The city, it raised me, it shaped me, it taught me what it means to fight for something larger than myself. But now when I hear the name DC, I'm just thinking of federal agents and occupation. It feels like we're really lost right now. Our people are living in fear. What's happening in DC, it's not just isolated, right? It's part of a pattern that stretches across the globe. We're living through a global reckoning with power. Power not as stewardship or service, but power as domination. And when I see armed men on the DC streets, when I hear about raids in neighborhoods where children are hiding behind curtains, I know this is not isolated. It is connected to the same colonial logic that has operated for centuries and centuries. It's the logic of conquest, the logic of white supremacy, the logic that declares that some lives are disposable for the comfort of others. And across the country, ICE raids are tearing communities apart. And among so many of those detained and placed into detention facilities or being deported, people whose only so-called crime was their skin or their accent, their lineage, or even what country they were born in. The raids are not just about immigration enforcement. They are about racial profiling. All right, let's call a spade a spade. They're about controlling brown and black bodies, about resurrecting fear as the primary language of governance. And this fear, it's a fear that white people will never know or fully understand. And I know I've got a lot of listeners that identify as white-bodied, so I say this with love. There's no shame. I love all people, no matter what. But this is an important piece for me because if you're white and you're listening, you may have deep caring and a deep desire for solidarity. In fact, you probably wouldn't even be listening to my podcast if you didn't. But simply because of the positional power that you have and the privilege of your skin color, you will never feel what safety feels like in our bodies, in a brown person's body, in a black person's body. And I just want to say that right now to feel safe is really hard if you are a brown or black person in this country. That is real. And this is how colonization breathes in 2025. Not just through the taking of land, but through the taking of our ability to feel joy, happiness, and freedom. It's through the erosion of our dignity. It's through the message that says, you do not belong. You do not belong. So colonization, it doesn't stop with bodies. It also seeks to control memory. It seeks to control story. The Smithsonian Institutes, all those incredible museums in Washington, D.C., those grand marbled halls of history, are being pressured right now to rewrite their own narratives. Federal officials have threatened funding unless exhibits on slavery, racism, and police violence are softened, reframed, or removed. They want a story of America that glows with quote-unquote greatness and that skips over the blood-soaked roots. This is cultural genocide. To erase the horror of slavery, to downplay the truth of genocide against indigenous people, to pretend that state violence has not been the engine of this nation. They want museums to tell us that slavery was just a detour, but not the foundation. That racism is merely a few bad apples, not a system woven into every institution. Let's make it to sound like slavery wasn't as bad as it really was, so that we don't seem like the bad guys in this story. That is controlling and also rewriting the narrative. And the fact that this is even on the table tells us everything. Colonization doesn't only conquer land, it conquers memory. And when you can control the story, you can control the future. Colonization is not just history, it is a pattern. Colonization begins with land, then it moves to bodies, then it moves to stories. Land is taken, bodies are controlled, stories are rewritten. This is why ICE raids and Smithsonian censorship are connected. One seizes bodies, the other seizes memory. Together, they reinforce a system where white supremacy remains unchallenged, where those in power can dictate not only the present, but the meaning of the past. This isn't new. It's the same pattern that justified the Trail of Tears, the same pattern that rationalized plantations, the same pattern that made Jim Crow possible. The names and technologies change, the pattern remains the same. The Trail of Tears in the 1830s, for those of you that need a little refresher, the U.S. government forced tens of thousands of Cherokee, Chickasaw, Choctaw, and Seminole people off their ancestral lands in the Southeast. Entire nations of indigenous people were told, you no longer belong here. Soldiers marched them hundreds of miles to so-called Indian Territory, which is now known as present-day Oklahoma. Along the way, thousands died from disease, starvation, and exhaustion. Children froze, elders collapsed, families buried their loved ones in shallow graves before being driven onward. And the U.S. government framed it as quote-unquote removal, as if these were boxes being relocated, not lives being shattered. This was colonization made policy. Seize the land, erase the people, reframe the story. It was called removal, but it was deportation. Mass deportation at gunpoint. Families forced out of the only homes they had ever known, marched into uncertainty, stripped of belonging. Isn't that exactly what ICE raids are doing today? Descending into our neighborhoods in the dead of night, their faces fully covered, police officers, Homeland Security people whose faces you can't even identify on a video camera, so they're completely immune to any repercussion for any action that could be abuse of power. And they're out there arresting fathers on their way to work, tearing children from their parents, telling entire communities that you have no right to be here. I mean, check this out, y'all. The Trail of Tears, modern day ICE raids, the language, it shifts. It shifts from removal to detention. But the logic is exactly the same. Exile the undesired. Displace the other. Break the bond between people and place. Plantations. These were another mask for the same violence. Imagine these vast fields of cotton, sugar, and tobacco. The wealth of this young nation. But behind that wealth was human bondage. Enslaved Africans stolen from their homelands, treated as property. Their lives were measured in labor and profit. Plantations were not just farms, y'all. These were machines of terror. Families were torn apart on auction blocks. People were whipped and chained for the sake of progress. And the mythology of the time said that this was natural, that Black people were less human, that white wealth was God ordained. That is the colonizer's lie. You turn cruelty into normalcy. Sound familiar? Turning theft into destiny. Sound familiar? These plantations, these sprawling estates, they were built on stolen labor. Let's keep that clear. Bodies treated as profit margins. Black people worked the land without compensation, their humanity denied, their existence reduced to output. And today, that same pattern, remember, colonization is a pattern. And today, that pattern shows up in the exploitation of migrant farm workers who harvest our food for poverty wages, often without legal protections. It shows up in prison labor, where incarcerated people who are disproportionately Black and brown earn cents an hour. Cents every hour, producing goods for corporations. The plantation system never really disappeared, y'all. It just put on a new uniform. Migrant visas, prison jumpsuits, minimum wage loopholes, the engine of exploitation, the engine of colonization. It keeps humming. And then finally, there's Jim Crow, right? After the Civil War, slavery ended in name. But the logic of domination, it simply changed costume. Jim Crow laws codified segregation, separate schools, separate buses, separate water fountains, separate cemeteries. Black people were denied the vote, denied fair trials, denied even the dignity of sitting in the same restaurant. Lynchings were public spectacles, postcards mailed home from the site of terror. Jim Crow didn't just police bodies, it policed possibility. It told generations of Black children, you do not belong in certain neighborhoods. You do not belong in certain universities. You do not belong in certain dreams. Jim Crow laws drew sharp, visible lines between who belonged and who didn't, who had rights and who had none. Separate but equal, except never really equal. Today, we got voter suppression laws that target Black and brown communities. We got gerrymandering that dilutes their power. We got police practicing the criminalization of our very existence. Mass incarceration functions as a new form of segregation, removing millions of people from their families and communities. And cultural erasure, like pressuring the Smithsonian to downplay slavery. This is another form of Jim Crow, policing not just where people can go, but what stories can be told. So yes, absolutely, the pattern remains. First, dispossess indigenous people of land, then enslave Africans for labor, then police Black life through segregation and terror. Today, the tools may be different. ICE raids, mass incarceration, museum censorship, university and college censorship, militarized police, but the pattern is alive and well. It's relentless. Dispossess, exploit, segregate, erase. Colonization does not need new ideas. It just recycles the old ones with modern tools. And that's what we are up against. Colonization is a planetary machine, and every nation touched by it bears its scars. Every single nation. You can think about even India, the colonization of India under the British Raj, also known as the United Kingdom. Generations lived under a crown, thousands of miles away, stripped of their self-determination. The British did not just take land and wealth, they rewrote identity. They told Indians that their culture was backwards, their language inferior, their spiritual traditions superstitious. They extracted spices, textiles, salt, but they also extracted dignity. And when famine struck, millions in India starved, while grain was exported to feed the empire. Colonization was never just about domination of land. It was about domination of imagination, teaching people to believe their own worth was less. The pattern remains. Colonization is not ancient history. It is alive. It is ICE raids at dawn. It is museum censorship in the name of patriotism. It is forests cut for profit while indigenous protectors are criminalized. And beneath all of it lies a deeper wound, the myth of superiority. the belief, whispered, legislated, preached, that some lives are worth more than other lives, that whiteness is the center and all else orbits around it. That myth is the root system feeding every branch of colonization and every new costume that it wears. And so I'm out here reflecting deeply on these stories. Colonization is something that is going to guide our conversations over the next 3 or 4 episodes. We're going to be having some deep conversations around what it means to be white, brown, and black in this world today and our identities. I've got some incredible guests for these upcoming episodes, and it's going to be part of a series that I'm curating right now for the podcast around racism and belonging and healing. I'm feeling a lot, y'all. I got to do what I can, and then we all got to just do what we can. And I do believe, I do have hope. I really do. It's just my hope feels a little diminished from time to time. And I don't want my podcast to be not positive and hopeful. But I'm also and we got to call this stuff out. We got to keep it real. So it's all part of that tightrope I was talking about at the very beginning. Keeping it real means sometimes listening to things that are giving us a shot in the arm, maybe some inspiration. So if you're getting value, if this is providing you some inspiration, if it's giving you a neural connection you didn't have before, if you're connecting some ideas to the patterns, if any of that is happening, then this offering that I'm providing, I hope, is at least moving something forwards. Pass this on to somebody who you think use it, that could hear it, that can resonate with it, that might need to ponder these ideas, to think about these ideas with more curiosity. There is no shame that I wish to put into this world, but there is accountability. And I do hope that those listening, no matter what side of the color spectrum you're on, that you understand that this is really an important dialogue that we need to have, and we can't be afraid of it. And we can't act like it's not needed. So thanks for listening. Thanks for tuning in. I appreciate you. I love you wherever you are. Keep rooted, stay balanced, and stay connected. Go out there, tell somebody you love them. We could all benefit from hearing that more. Maybe give somebody a nice long hug. I will encourage you to think about researching your family history, learning more about your lineage and your grandparents and your great-great-great-grandparents, and just learning more about your family history and health, and creating some relationship to the land you're on. A part of those action items can be also getting outside more. So if you listen to Erotic Ecology, get outside more, spend more time in nature. That's for your own mental health. So just a little bit of these takeaways are a part of what I'm hoping to activate in the coming months through a learning community. And in that learning community, I'd like to try to meet once a month with those people that are here listening and tuned in, and others that want to kind of come together and take time to be in fellowship around the ideas that we're talking about in these podcast episodes with the guests. So please stay tuned. The next episode's going to be fire. It's really going to be amazing as we go deeper into stories around identity and colonization. And then the other episode after that is called Decolonizing Wealth with the national best-selling authors. So let's all do our part. Be well, and peace. Everlutionary, transforming and healing the world, is brought to you by me, Hawah Kasat. If you would like to find out more about my story, head to hawahkasat.com and visit social media, where I'm active on Instagram, Substack, LinkedIn, TikTok, and Facebook. Be sure to share this podcast with a friend, and to make sure you don't miss any future episodes, hit that subscribe button on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, or anywhere else podcasts are found. Thank you for listening. Stay in touch. Peace.